No one cared who I was till I put on the mask.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's a little Bane mask action to get started. So we talked about the end of the Peloponnesian War. Athens, most of the war was centered around the Aegean and the Peloponnesus. Athens, under Alcibiades, decided to attack Syracuse. On land, they were very thirsty in the hot sun and jumped into the stream to drink, and the Spartans pounced on them. And then at sea, their fleet was bottled up in the port of Syracuse and completely wiped out. It was a total disaster for Athens, and basically the war was over at that point. The Delian League falls apart after Syracuse, and the war returns to the Aegean, where Athens gets its grain through the Hellespont and the Black Sea. Another interesting thing that's going to happen is the Carthaginians will try to take Syracuse and Sicily. Carthage is a Phoenician colony, and they colonized the north coast of Africa. And there's some conflict between the Greeks and the Carthaginians all over Sicily. The younger brother of the Persian king, Cyrus, helps the Spartan fleet. The Spartans were not known as great sailors. They were famous for their infantry and were a land power. And finally, Lysander destroys the fleet, the Athenian fleet. Lysander is a Spartan general. And then in 404, the war is over. Now Dionysius at Syracuse comes to power. He's a tyrant. And he is important because he is able to defend the Greek colonies from the Carthaginians. Just a little reminder, the Phoenician colonies were these blue ones, and they came from here. Israel is next to Phoenicia, and then you see the Greek colonies here. And this is where the grain came to Athens because Sparta had burned down all their fields. But there's this conflict. Carthage becomes a very important city, more important than any of the founding cities, and there's this conflict here in Sicily. Now, we started off ancient history here in the Fertile Crescent, and we keep moving here, and then this is going to be right in the middle of everything, and then eventually, of course, we'll end up in Rome, and there's conflict between Rome and Carthage. Here we see the Greek part of Sicily and the Phoenician part. Thrasybulus helped. There's this conflict right between Sparta and Athens, but then Thebes is getting more powerful, and Thrasybulus, helped by the Thebans and one of the Spartan kings, kicks out the 30 tyrants and restores democracy in Athens. Cyrus the Younger sees how good the Spartans are at war and takes 10,000 of them with Xenophon to try to overthrow his brother Artaxerxes. Unfortunately, he is killed at the Battle of Cunaxa right away. And the 10,000 have to fight their way out of the heart of the Persian Empire. When they get up to the Black Sea, where the Greek speakers are and the Greek colonies, they shout, "Thalassa, Thalassa, the sea, the sea." And there's a book by Xenophon called the Anabasis. Syracuse is again besieged by the Carthaginians. Spartans start waging war in Asia Minor. Now, one of the things that is important about Xenophon's Anabasis is no one could stop the Greek infantry at all. And so the Greeks, like Phillip, and his son Alexander start thinking maybe we can conquer the Persian Empire. So there's this precedent of the Spartan army being undefeated in Asia Minor. Epaminondas leads Thebes to hegemony by coming up with the oblique phalanx that you guys all wrote excellently about. And Philip is a hostage. Philip of Macedon is a hostage in Thebes for 3 years, and Epaminondas is his teacher. He teaches him about politics and war. In the Illyrian border with Macedon, Philip's older brother, who's the king, is wiped out along with most of the Macedonian army. Philip has to return and rebuild the army and the kingdom, and he uses some of the things that he had learned in Thebes under Epaminondas. In 356, his son is born, Alexander. So as we know, the oblique phalanx here, with the Thebans overloaded one side, smashed through the Spartan line, and then turned inward and wiped out the army. It's the Battle of Leuctra. So we have Philip consolidates his power in using marriages and some invasions. He takes care of the borders with Thrace and Illyria. He takes over Amphipolis, which has a gold mine, and he promised if Athens he'd give it to them, but he reneged on that. And then he takes Pydna, and he starts using that gold to build up his kingdom, his army, and to bribe politicians in other cities. He takes Philippi, well, names it Philippi. It also had a gold mine. His general Parmenion defeats the Illyrians on the western borders. He loses his eye at the Battle of Methone. You can see there's a scar there. There's some grosser pictures, but I chose to use that one. Conquers the Thracian coast. And then he invades Thessaly, which is just north of Athens, and the Battle of Crocus Fields against the Phocaeans. He kills 6,000 Phocaeans, takes 3,000 captured prisoners, and then proceeds to drown them. So we look at how Philip consolidated his power. Macedonians were considered country folk. They didn't speak the same Greek as the folks farther down the Peloponnesus. The Macedonian army was wiped out by the Illyrians. His brother was killed. He learned from Epaminondas in Thebes and developed new military tactics. Built cities, encouraged the rural folks to move into it, secured the borders in the north, north and west in Thrace. And then he starts moving down this way. Brings Aristotle to teach his son, Alexander. And finally, the Battle of Chaeronea. He uses the oblique phalanx with cavalry to defeat the united Greek army. They all ally under him at the League of Corinth, except for Sparta, who are stubborn. And they name him Strategos to invade the Persian Empire. Here's an account again from Wikipedia, which is pretty good. There's a lot of really good information there on how the Macedonian phalanx was organized differently from the hoplite phalanx. You can see the longer spears here, the sarissa, versus the shorter spears here of the hoplites at the Battle of Chaeronea. So there's some differences here: the spear length, the depth of the ranks, and the shield was used differently, so you can see. And then they had these spears at an angle to deflect arrows. And the Jonas brothers never stood a chance. And you guys have these slides so you can read this at your leisure. So Timoleon, another thing that's going on is Timoleon from Corinth takes over and leads Syracuse, and he defeats the Carthaginian army in a great slaughter. Phillip, at the Battle of Chaeronea, solidifies his control over Greece. We see how the gaps and the oblique phalanx, like this, when Philip moves back and the Athenians move forward, this gap appears and Alexander's able to ride his cavalry in. And here's a couple good diagrams. So you're set up here, and then Philip advances, then he moves back, which pulls the Athenians up, and then this gap appears, and the overloaded side here is able to hold these guys in check while Alexander comes around, and then these guys are surrounded and everyone else runs away. So we see the expansion of Macedon under Philip, and he's assassinated by Pausanias, and then his son Alexander takes over. The Spartans stayed stubborn and out of the League of Corinth, and Philip said, if I have to come down there with my army, I'm going to destroy your city, burn your fields, and enslave all your people. And the Spartans' reply was, if. All right, so next we will have Alexander's conquests. Look forward to